Right, this is the Quo-Cast, and very delighted today to be joined via the medium of Skype by Iain White from the tribute band Counterfeit Quo. I've heard of them, I'm sure you have as well. He is, by his own admission, the Rossi of the group. How did that whole journey begin for you?
Well, with this particular band, I was contacted via a YouTube because I was in a previous Quo tribute band called Quo Motion from Birmingham. We started there about 2010. Went going for about 8 years. Never really did some good festivals and stuff, but it never really passed the sort of pub stage, which is quite frustrating because it is a good band and they have actually started up again recently. But the guys from Counterfeit, they've been going for about 22 years, and they do a high, I suppose, a nicer level of gigs. They kind of do Butlins and hotels and theatres, so it's the next level above, and they've got a really good reputation in the industry, being a really professional, solid band. And their Rossi was leaving them, so they contacted me. I think I did a dep for them in about 2016, 15, I think it was. They liked what I did, and I joined officially in 2016. So that's 3 years in now, and loving every minute of it.
They are, as you say, one of the top tribute bands out there. I mean, how did you come into Quo? You said you're in Quo Motion. I do remember that group being around. How did you yourself become a fan?
I remember quite clearly watching the TV with my dad when I was a kid. I must have been about 10, 11, 12 years old, and End of the Road 84 Milton Keynes came on. It must have been BBC or ITV. Just came on the TV. Because in those days, we only had 3 or 4 channels. And I remember just being gobsmacked by I knew nothing about Quo, never heard them before. And then just the riffs, the guitar, the power of them, and just that incessant shuffle beat. It's such a powerful video, I think, to watch. It's such a great, obviously a massive audience and a great occasion. A lot of theatre there. It's just a fantastic video to watch. And I think the next day I went out and I bought Pile Driver, or I asked my dad to buy me Pile Driver, and I remember the image of that, the Pile Driver with the long hair hanging down, the legs apart. That looked such, it was kind of like almost pantomime classic rock, how a rock band should look, and obviously they sounded like it as well. I've been a fan ever since. I've seen them loads of times, and first time I saw them live would be on the Ain't Complaining tour. That'd be 1988, I think that was. So I never saw the classic Frantic Four, although I did see them in 2014 when they're kind of reformed, but not in the original 70s lineup. And there's just something about it. The music just makes me smile, makes me laugh, reminds me of good times. And the much maligned, as people think they're these kind of brainless 3-chord only, musicians, but they're a lot more subtle and a lot more interesting than people give them credit for. But I think they use it it's a marketing tool, really, 3-chord Quo. And as we all know, Rossi's life into the bank. He's multi-millionaire and living very high on his career. So yeah, very happy to be listening to it and playing it, and having great fun with it with the guys in Counterfeit.
There is this kind of misguided simplicity, isn't there? There's a real simplicity to it that is not easy to achieve. How did you go about mastering that yourself, as what is probably one of the hardest things to do in a Quo tribute band?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I mean, a lot of it is kind of it's kind of like muscle memory now from since I started playing guitar, which, probably Mark Knopfler and Francis Rossi were my guitar heroes when I started out. It's just been playing those riffs all these times. But there is, I remember reading a documentary once, or watching a documentary with Jeff Lynne. He was talking about Quo, and he's just said, to make something simple sound exciting is very, very difficult to do. And they do it in spades. There's not many people that can just do effectively a basic 12-bar shuffle and make it sound memorable and interesting. I mean, we're still listening to Paper Plane, what's that, 40 years later? And it's just a fast blues. And without sort of blow and trumpet, being a Rossi in a band is really quite a unique. If you think about people through history, if you think of like Brian May, Eddie Van Halen, these great guitar players, Joe Satriani, Steve, they are fantastic instrumentalists. But what Rossi does, he sings all 90% of the tunes. He does all the onstage chat. He's the front man. He's the focal point on stage, and he's a great guitar player and obviously a great songwriter as well. There's not many people I can think of. There's probably Mark Knopfler might be one, who is the lead guitarist, the lead singer, the frontman, the main focal point. Well, it's a lot more difficult than people think, to get standing on stage, remembering all the words, remembering how to stand, which song comes next, introduce the band, a little bit of light-hearted chat, get all the riffs right, get the solos right, and look like you're relaxed, which he does, is, it's quite an undertaking. It's a lot more work than you'd expect.
Well, yes, it's one of the reasons that I never took up music as a full-time thing, because it's very difficult remembering everything. I'm certainly really bad at that. I used to have the set list written down and all sorts of things. But speaking of set list, when you're thinking it up, obviously I've spoken to previous bands and they've all got their own take on it, but how do you go about compiling a set list for a gig?
With previous band Quo Motion, we're very much into it's got to rock, it's got to be hard, it's got to be heavy, it's got to be original Quo, and that is absolutely fantastic. But unfortunately, I mean, you can bear that out with Quo set lists now. When you're playing to perhaps not a hardcore partisan crowd, if you need to grab the minds and the hearts of the sort of casual listener, you need to basically have the hit. So our set list, Counterfeit used to do the heavy stuff, Backwater and Just Take Me and all this, and it was fantastic. But you'd be playing to 40 people who would love it, and 30 people who weren't that interested. So we now do the kind of, we basically mirrors Quo now. So, I mean, for example, our image is the black jeans, it's the black waistcoat, the white shirt, it's the very modern, sort of rhino on the bass type of look. And the set list echoes that. So we start with Caroline, but then you go into Something About Your Baby I Like, Mean Girl. We put things like Margarita Time, and some of probably the hardcore fans would snigger at that, but ultimately it gets people on the dance floor, The Wanderer, What You're Proposing, really all the hits with a few deep cut tracks in there, but we don't go too heavy because it does kind of alienate people sometimes. So we put things like Dirty Water, Don't Drive My Car, even though that was a hit single. When we do a rock club, we will pull out all the heavy stuff. So we'll put in 4,500 Times, Big Fat Mama, Don't Waste My Time, things like this. Some Roadhouse Blues occasionally, Junior's Wailing, but it really does mirror what Quo do now, because I think by their own admission, I mean, Francis Rossi said it, even back in the 80s, he said they do 4,500 Times at someone like the NEC in Birmingham, and the first 4 or 5 rows would be loving it, but the people at the back are kind of zoned out a little bit. So you've got to basically give the people what they want, so it's pretty much hits with a few deep cuts is where we come from, and it works well for us. I think we're one of the busiest bands out there, to be honest. We do 40 to 50 shows a year. We get quite well paid for it as well. Don't tell the tax man. And
Well, I'm sure with all those gigs that you must have a story or two from them.
Okay, so we're doing a gig in Harrogate on Saturday night. Funny little story. A guy came into the dressing room after the show, and we sort of joked, have you got backstage pass, etc. And he said, I've got to tell you something, boys. He said, and I forgot his name was Alan something. I forgot what his name was, but we can look it up. Anyway, he said, I used to work for Phonogram back in the 70s, which is obviously Quo's record company, who owned Vertigo. And he said, I knew the band really quite well. And I came to his gig. He obviously retired now. I think he's about his 70s, wondering how you're going to pull this off, He said, I used to design all the band's albums. So he's designed Blue For You, album artwork, and Live, and Pile Drive and everything. I think he did it up to about 1980, and he worked with the band quite well. He said he got to know them quite well, went on tour with them, and he just, apart from, I don't want to say he wasn't saying how brilliant we were, but he said how you got the music was great. He played it really well, but all the little mannerisms and the sort of standing together and the little chats and the talking, and he said it was really absolutely spot on. But it was just great to meet someone that had worked with the band, and I mean, somebody working on the Blue For You album cover. It's a bit of a rock classic, isn't it? Really, a nice little conversation we had with him, and he gave us our best wishes and said it was a really, really good show, and how it really echoed. Even though we mentioned before about how our set list is like the hits, really, what Quo do now. He said it was how we looked physically, is the way I'm looking for. Physically, sorry, is the way we looked. He said it was a real hark back to how he knew them in the sort of 77, 79, 80 sort of days. Great to meet him.
Well, I'm sure it was, and it's good to hear that he enjoyed the gig. Do you have any gigs coming up?
This Saturday we'll be in Wareham, in Dorset. The next weekend we got 2 gigs. I think one's in Reading, one's in Wales. I think it's August is pretty much every weekend for pretty much the rest of the year. I think it gets towards December and it quiets down a little bit. but we kick off again sort of after Christmas, New Year's, and it kicks off again. So it's pretty much every weekend.
Well, it's always good to be busy when you're working in a band like that because it kind of keeps you tight. Is there anything musically that maybe you've had a go at? I mean, you mentioned that they used to do Backwater and things like that. Is there anything that you've not been able to nail that you really want to?
We keep trying with Mystery Song, and it never kind of seems to gel. And there's not many people that can really nail that vocal like Parfit. And even though our Parfit, who's actually, I call him Nick Parfit. His name's Nick in our band, Nick Parfit. He's a great singer. I'm not sure he's quite as comfortable with that screaming rage. So Mystery Song is one that evades us a little bit. But most everything else has kind of gone quite well, I think. Mystery Song's the one.
Well, yes, it is a difficult one because there's all sorts of effects going on and there's lots of different elements in there that I'm surprised that the actual band themselves managed to pull it off these days.
Yeah. Obviously, we've got. I haven't seen him live yet, but Richie Malone seems to be doing a good job of it. But I think they did pull away from it a few years after Rick's passing. He's obviously he left that one well alone, but he seems to have the confidence now to push it. But it is it is a difficult one, and obviously they do it majority of the time in a medley, don't they? Or they have done of recent years. So it's never been quite the full track. Yeah, so tough one for anyone to emulate that is his vocals.
Yeah, I've got something. We're going to pull away from Counterfeit Quo just for a second, but something a little bit controversial. What are your thoughts on Richie Malone? I know that you've not actually seen him live yet.
I think he's done a fantastic job. One thing I think is really good. I've seen pictures of him in the past when he used to have long hair and he was a bit of a perfect lookalike. And I don't know if he cut it short not to look like him, but it seemed like an obvious choice by Rossi not to have a sort of a lookalike. When I'm sure there's a few out there. But he's a fantastic guitar player, great sound. But I think like anybody, probably the first couple of shows he probably wasn't as confident as he'd like to have been. But you can see him last couple of years really stepped up. I've only seen him on YouTube videos. His vocals have grown immensely, and his guitar playing has always been there. And they seem to have, him and Rossi seem to really gel. Yeah, obviously him and Parfit had a fantastic career together. Reading his book, actually, the I Talk Too Much, which I've read recently, they were saying how they probably, the last 10 years was a bit tumultuous and wasn't quite the sort of best buddies we all thought. But they seem to very quickly, in a couple of years, got a really good chemistry on stage. In fact, the bass player in our band, John, he's seen them. He's been on a festival. He's in a few other bands. He's been on a festival where Quo were headlining. So he was actually backstage with them. And not hanging out, but you saw them. And he set out the best they've sounded for years and years and years. He was really impressed. So I'm looking forward to trying to catch them when I can.
Yes, I've seen a few of the videos myself. I've been very impressed. Have you actually met any of the band yourself?
Yeah, quite a funny story actually. Yeah, years ago, this would be late 80s. My sister actually won a competition with a local paper to meet the band and get a gold record. So we met them backstage at the NEC. This would be about 1990, something like that. We met all the band, got a gold record. I actually gave Rossi a demo tape of I was in an original band at the time, trying to be a rock star. Didn't really work. And I gave Rossi. I had a good chat with them. Had a good chat with all the guys. And the one thing I really remember is Harvey Goldsmith, who's a bit of a legendary promoter in the industry, was sitting backstage. And all I remember is there's a massive bucket filled with ice and Budweiser. And I remember thinking it was really rock and roll. It was just this room just full of beer and there was nothing else in it. And a couple of guys just hanging out. So yeah, and I met them on a book tour as well. I got some stuff signed once on a book tour. I remember speaking to Rossi quite a lot. I was being a bit of a guitar nerd and asking him about how he gets his sound, and I was asking about what amps he's using, and we had quite an interesting chat. Yeah, it was good.
In terms of your guitar playing and things, do you think it's important? I mean, how hard is it to nail that sound?
I wouldn't say it's hard to nail it, but it's easy to go too aggressive with the sounds. I've seen a lot of bands, whether it's cover bands or tribute bands, where they have over distorted guitars. People think they have their guitars really loud and really heavy. And if you listen to some of these, particularly the early stuff, it's a very loud, dynamic, but almost a clean sound. Down Down would be a classic example. When the guitars thunder in, it sounds incredibly powerful because it's quite a clean sound. So the important thing to do is not have too much distortion. And he's got loads of confidence and charisma and swagger Rossi has with his guitar playing. It's almost like especially some of his early solos. If I think of something like "Fine, Fine, Fine" off the Quo album, it's like almost like a country sort of solo, very clean, very precise, very confident, very fast, very elegant, really well worked out against the diatonic chord to the solo. So basically cleaner and louder is the thing, not too distorted. That's probably going a bit too nerdy on the guitar thing, but that's one mistake I see a lot of people do, and you've got to really back off the overdrive.
Well, yes, which is why the more modern Quo material that has come out has got that kind of clean thing to it, and people say, oh, it's not heavy enough, and you think, well, actually, it's close to what was there. It's just produced slightly differently.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. It's the early stuff was really, really clanging and really quite clean, surprising and quite surprising. Some of the heaviest bands in terms of rhythm guitar players, if you think of Malcolm Young out of AC/DC, Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, their guitar sounds, they're really not that distorted, they're not that heavy, but they play with such power, they command the sound so well. The sort of thing Parfit did. There's a little bit of drive there, but the great guitar players, they use their power to get the sound through. If that, power of the right hand, I should say, rather than using the amp.
Well, that is very true. You mentioned that Piledriver was your first Quo album. Do you have a particular one of choice?
I really am fond of Piledriver, but the one that, to me that there's not a duff track on it. I really like Whatever You Want. I think especially the last two tracks where they put them together. Come Rock With Me, is it?
And Rockin' On.
Rockin' On, yeah. How it just segues together. It's just their sound there is just, they're just really good. For me, the late 70s, they'd peaked at they'd got the production right, they got the songwriting right. Obviously the lineup was powerful. So that 79 was a really, really good sound for me. I love that. Have you got any favourites?
Do I have any favourites? Well, some that wouldn't be popular among hardcore. I am quite fond of the late 80s albums, your Perfect Remedy and Ain't Complaining, but personally my personal favourite is On The Level, because it's just that driving force, the whole, as you say, about the Whatever You Want album, there isn't a duff track on it in my opinion. It's just wall-to-wall sound, but not over the top.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm with you on that one. I'm a really big fan of Ain't Complaining was the first tour I saw, but I really love the In the Army Now album, which I was surprised to learn in the book. Ross was saying how it was such a sort of a mismatch of different writers, and it was kind of stitched together at the last minute almost, the way he was describing it. He was also I think he's quite well known, he was sort of using substances and he wasn't quite the full shilling, and to me it sounds a really great complete album from start to finish. Really nice production, great songs. So yeah, I do like some of the 80s stuff as well.
Well, it seemed, I mean, I've read the book as well. I really enjoyed it. It seems that album was an attempt at cracking the pop market, which of course they were going to in that period. They needed it to be a success, and I think in some ways there are a couple of exceptions where you're thinking, well, this is a bit of a weird direction. Tracks like Speechless and things like that, but then there are others that kind of nail it.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think they had to. I think I remember reading at the time that Rossi's idea was, I think Parfit wanted to go down a much heavier route, and Rossi, I think quite rightly said, no, we need to capture, like you say, the synths and the keyboards and the more popular end. And I think In the Army Now was, I think, number 2 in the UK, but number 1 in a lot of countries around the world. So the sort of lighter end was the way to go. And reading his book, which you said you have, they seem to have got more successful as the 80s and 90s went on. Certainly in terms of financially, whether the fans like what they're doing or not. But that, at the end of the day, they had to pay the bills and keep the crew going and keep the trainer rolling. So the popular side, I think, had saved them really.
And of course, once the 90s came round and David Walker got involved, and they got more involved in more media and press and things like that, and it just got bigger and bigger, which is why, of course, they're still around now.
Yeah. I think there is at the time. They had to take. They made it more of a brand, not a band, didn't they? And they had to just do what they needed to do to keep the money rolling and keep the punters interested. And you can't always do that with you can't make original music. I think they're a good reference point to that is you think of the Rolling Stones. I think they had a blues album out about a couple of years ago, but I can't remember the last time they had would it be 90s or something, 20 odd years ago when they had an album out, and they're still touring, but they make themselves relevant in different ways. But they're iconic sort of the tongue and all that sort of stuff, and the merch they sell. But in terms of a valid band, you'd say they're not really, but they're still a massive draw. So you have to just go with what the public wants sometimes.
Well, yes, and I think as well, the bigger the brand in band terms, the easier it must be to do a tribute, because you've got so much to draw upon.
Yeah, in a way, it's a real blessing, because you've got so much material to work with. You've got so much loyalty and love for the band out there. It's I wouldn't say it's almost kind of like you pitch your tent up and everyone turns up. You have to work hard at these things, but it's great to have a band like that to draw from. And we always say a lot of times we do 2 set lists. We do 2 sets at a gig. And the second set is just absolute, just a wall of hits. And we can't think of any band really there's 10, 12 tracks in a row. You think What You Propose and In the Arm and Out, Roll Over, Lay Down, whatever you want. It just goes on and on and on. And the dance floor is generally just up and rocking from the moment the moment we start to the moment we finish. And there's not many bands have got that sort of pull in their back catalogue.
No, that is very true. So you are in the tribute band Counterfeit Quo. If they wanted to find out more about it, where would they need to go?
Really easy place. Just search for Counterfeit Quo on Facebook, or it's counterfeitquo.com is the email. Everyone seems to search things on Facebook these days. We haven't got a Twitter handle yet, but we're just keeping it to those at the moment. And hopefully we'll see you in a venue real soon.
Yes, because you do theatres and things like that, don't you?
Yeah, theatres. We do. We've got a contract with a place called the Warner's Hotel, which is like an adult-only hotel. Not that adult, but just no kids. And we do those all around the country. A lot of theatres, a lot of Isle of Wight theatres, Butlins as well. Some holiday camps, which are really great gigs because you've got this kind of audience that are just desperate to be entertained, and the curtains pull back and you've got sort of 3,000 punters sort of waiting to. They're not there to see you specifically, but there might be 3 or 4 acts, and they'll theme it as like a 70s rock weekend or a headbangers weekend, whatever. And we're sort of in the mix there. The Butlins are great shows actually, because you could be on with some sort of pretty decent stars of a couple of years ago. So you might be. We found ourselves, funnily enough, headlining over Paul Young. Unfortunately, his voice didn't sound as good as I thought it would be. People like Toy Wilcox and Bad Manners, these sort of people. And it's quite, some of those a bit weird actually. Sort of, you're in a bigger dressing room, or you're on a time later than them. And Slade played there with us as well. Met Slade there a few times. It's the one without Noddy Holder. I think there's a few Slade bands at the Butlins. But yeah, the Butlins are great gigs to do.
Yes, indeed. Well, I wish you the greatest success with it, and thank you, Iain, for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Jamie. It's been a pleasure talking to you.